Good afternoon, everybody. This is Paco Yervides with River Network. We will be starting in about 2 more minutes our fourth webinar of the series. Thank you very much. Okay, it's 1 o'clock according to my time, Eastern. Good afternoon. Good morning to some of you. Thank you very much for joining us in our fourth webinar of the Civic Engagement Series, Water Decision Makers, How to Engage Them for a Winning Partnership. This is Paco Yervides, and we have an amazing set of panelists that will be speaking to us briefly about many great stories and best practices. That's why we want to start at the top of the hour. All of you, because of the number of attendees, are on listen only, but there is a question area that you can type your questions. We will be fielding those questions and then following up. There's also a platform for further communications that we have. We'll talk about that briefly at the end of the session. And definitely the presentation and the PowerPoint will be available later, the recording for you. I will do a follow-up email. So if you don't catch something, I will make sure that you receive it. Just make sure you type it in your question box. Well, River Network is proud to host this session. We are celebrating our 30th year anniversary, and we are a national nonprofit that has a unique niche with environmental groups on the protection restoration of rivers. We just finished our 5-year strategic plan in which civic engagement became one of our newest knowledge areas that we're strengthening in our core strategic areas of strong champions. So we're very happy of this series and how it's going. We did have an advisory group that helped us select the themes. We are very appreciative of our sponsors, the Mott Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Wege Foundation, and definitely on today's speakers. Their time is most appreciated. Like I said, this is the fourth of a series of 5 webinars that we have planned. If you would like copies of the last recordings, please just feel free to email me, and they will also be sent in a link in a future email. So we have several case studies from around the country. As you can see there, the order of speakers will be from Buffalo, Atlanta, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Philadelphia. We are not sure if we'll have a lot of time for Q&A, but we'll have a survey at the end of the presentation that we hope you can fill out and give us your feedback. And again, there will be opportunities for further engaging these speakers through our platform. So with that, I want to turn it over to Catherine Bear, our Director of Science and Policy.
Great, thank you. This is Catherine Bear. I work with Paco at River Network, and I just want to thank Paco so much for organizing this entire webinar series, which has been fabulous. And so I'm a director of our Science and Policy program at River Network, and I work from North Carolina, where I'm joining you from today. And just a background on this webinar in particular, I think it's really interesting and important sort of in the evolution of the work of water advocates and community groups with local water decision makers to sort of see where we are in time. Because I know for me personally, I started my career working for the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper in North Georgia, And at that time, we were really going after and trying to make sure that discharge permits were meeting their legal limits. And so we did a lot of advocacy and litigation. And there were a lot of, dischargers in our watershed which were regularly violating their permits. But one day we actually went and visited a small wastewater treatment plant pretty high up in our watershed, up in the headwaters. And it was a really small place. And I remember meeting the man who operated the plant and just coming away from that visit with sort of a really different sense and understanding and appreciation water utilities are responsible for. It's quite a lot, and there's a lot to it, and sometimes with very small staff, and other places really big ones. But from that time forward, I think I always saw that there was an opportunity really to work with both water utilities and water decision makers in local governments who are actually the ones often making the decisions about investments in their communities. And since then, I've had the great opportunity really to work with a variety of water and wastewater utilities and industry associations that represent them as part of both collaborative and advocacy efforts. Sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. But we've worked on a number of issues, such as how to develop sewage overflow notification requirements to protect public health, how jointly to create federal funding for green infrastructure and water efficiency. We did a lot of debate and time spent together working on policies on things like sanitary sewer overflows and blending and sewage dumping. And so I sort of had an interesting experience working with a variety of folks in the industry over time, and really come to sort of appreciate, both the role of the advocacy community as well as that of the utility industry. And I think we've really seen a change in the utility landscape over the years. And we've just come from a River Rally annual meeting. I know some of you were with us, but one of our panels there was that a number of water utilities presented, and they were talking about the utility of the future. And so there's a real sense that for some water utilities that they're moving from purely providing a service of treating water or providing water to your faucet to becoming really anchor institutions in the community and thinking more broadly about things like quality of life, including workforce development, environmental sustainability, things not just like water, but also energy, affordability issues, and also sometimes even funding nonprofits. So not all the utilities are there yet, becoming the utility of the future, but really there are some exciting opportunities out there for community organizations, water and environmental justice groups to work closely with their water utility in some places. And so we really hope today that the great examples our presenters are going to provide from the utility and the nonprofit perspective provide some great examples of how these partnerships and collaborations exist, and what are some ways that you might do so in your own community. So with that, we've got a lot of speakers today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone at one time, and then we're just going to move through the presentations. So let me go ahead and introduce everyone. Really thank you all for joining us today. So first is Jennifer Comiskey, is an urban planner who focuses on community development and planning, creation of affordable housing and green infrastructure. She resides in Buffalo, New York, where she serves as Director of Planning and Community Development for People United for Sustainable Housing. In this capacity, she leads, pushes efforts to create high-quality, green, affordable housing on Buffalo's west side and to reclaim vacant lots as opportunities for stormwater management and community green space. Prior to coming to Buffalo, she helped create shared equity housing cooperatives with the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board in New York City and to develop affordable housing in Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston. Second speaker today will be Todd Hill, who is Deputy Commissioner of the City of Atlanta Department of Watershed Management. Todd is currently responsible for managing the Office of Watershed Protection, which provides environmental compliance, industrial pretreatment inspections and permitting, fat, oil, and grease inspections, flow monitoring, erosion and sediment control, site development, natural resources service, greenway planning, green infrastructure planning, and water and sanitary laboratory testing, and all necessary reporting in accordance to regulatory requirements and permits. Mr. Hill is a graduate from Mississippi State University with a degree in civil engineering. Constance Hack is Director of Administration and External Affairs. Ms. Hack joined the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District in 2005 as Director of Communications and Community Relations. In her current capacity, she's responsible for the organization's internal and external communications, public outreach and education, media relations, customer service, government affairs. She's held leadership positions in her career, including executive director of both Inroads, Northeast Ohio, and the Nordson Corporation Foundation. Ms. Hack is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, and she holds a bachelor's degree from Tufts University and a master's from Case Western Reserve Mandel School of Applied Social Science. With her today is Matt Shraver, who's the manager of watershed protection, also with Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. He coordinates various water quality programs with the sewer district member communities, including operation and maintenance of green infrastructure implementation under the sewer district's Project Clean Lake Consent Degree program. He additionally facilitates implementation of the stormwater management program, and he brings with him 19 years of field experience in stormwater management and is both a certified professional in erosion sediment control and sediment stormwater inspector. Next, we'll be hearing from Ezra Meyer. Ezra is the Water Resources Specialist for Clean Wisconsin. He brings his background in water policy and science to bear on the water-related policy work at the state level and the local policy watershed restoration work in the greater Milwaukee watersheds that flow into Lake Michigan and southeastern Wisconsin. For nearly 20 years, Ezra has served on the board of directors of the Friends of the Mukwonago, and apologies for if I said that wrong, a nonprofit watershed advocacy organization he co-founded in that area. For over 7 years, he served as an appointed commissioner of the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District, and he studied economics and environmental studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and returned there for a master's degree in urban planning. Finally, we're joined by Howard Neukrug, who's currently a professor of practice in water leadership and innovation at the University of Pennsylvania. He's formerly CEO and commissioner of Philadelphia Water, faculty at the Institute for Urban Research, and a principal with Case Environmental LLC, as well as a senior advisor in Global Water Leaders Group. He was a founding director of the Water Center at Penn, and his 40 years in the water industry culminated as CEO of Philadelphia Water. He currently advises cities and water utilities in everything water, and is a founder of Philadelphia's first Office of Watersheds. He created the award-winning Green Cities Clean Waters program. As a professional engineer, he's a member of the U.S. National Drinking Water Advisory Council, principal of Case Environmental LLC, and senior advisor to the Global Water Leaders Group. So thank you all for joining us, and I hand it back over to you, Paco, to get us started.
Thank you, and I'm passing it straight to Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. And so, Paco, should I just can I advance the slides, or should I just tell you when to do them?
Just say next, please, and I'll advance them.
Okay, next. Can you advance? Okay, there we are. So just a quick overview of PUSH, People United for Sustainable Housing. We began in 2005 as a community organizing organization. So that was 2 organizers who lived on the west side, going door to door, talking to residents, really building a base of leaders and working with them to create campaigns to address some of the neighborhood's most pressing problems. And what neighbors identified was vacancy and abandonment, high utility bills, and lack of good jobs. So the way we've addressed these is through green affordable housing, green infrastructure, pathways to green jobs and training, and assisting families and businesses access weatherization services. And we do all of this with a community organizing and leadership development model. And today I'll focus on our green infrastructure piece. Next slide. So our green infrastructure work we call Push Blue, and that really started with a focus on the west side, and then has since then scaled up to include a social enterprise business that really works citywide to address Buffalo's CSO problems, as well as add an environmental justice and community-focused lens to the conversation. Because from our perspective, green infrastructure is both real infrastructure and also has other bottom line opportunities for neighborhood beautification and creation of open space and creation of green jobs with a variety of entry points. And part of this work has been leveraging the job creating power of some of our local green infrastructure drivers, both our sewer authority, who's under a long-term control plan to address CSOs and has included a significant green component in that, and then also our city's new zoning code, which has lowered the threshold on mandating dealing with stormwater on site. And next slide. So I always also want to start the conversation with our crew, who are now experts in green infrastructure. And some of the people on our crew came to this work with landscaping experience, and some really just came with limited experience but wanted to do work improving their neighborhood. And so far, we've done over 30 green infrastructure installations, from rain gardens to green roofs to bioswales in our neighborhood on the west side and also throughout the city. Next slide. And so we've also really, I think, tried to focus our work on kind of neighborhood and community level installations that the city and the sewer authority have been working on green streets and other efforts in the public right-of-way. And so we wanted to pilot some different strategies that could be replicated at a smaller scale. So for example, rain gardens, and then also at the site is a rain garden that's taking we disconnected the downspouts from the 2 adjacent houses that we owned and put them into the rain garden. And then there's also a permeable paver parking pad. Next slide. In this one, we have in front of one of our affordable housing sites, we have the site on the left, we have a stormwater planter. Here we did not have room either at the front or the back of the house to do a rain garden, so we did this stormwater planter, and in both this planter and then the garden on the right, we planted these with native plants and a pollinator garden to encourage birds and bees. Next slide. Okay, on this one, we have a green roof that we did on a lot line mixed use building that, again, there were limited solutions for stormwater management because, again, the building extended to the entirety of the lot and there were no, but on all adjacent sides were other buildings. So we did a green roof on this one and trained our crew in that. We used pre-grown cedar mats, and again, we're partnered with a local green roof designer and installer, which we've subsequently gone on to do other projects with, and he's utilized our crew. Next slide. In addition to the install work, we have a greenhouse facility where we grow native plants for our installation, and we've designed this greenhouse to harvest rainwater from the sides of the structure so that it requires, we don't have a dedicated water source and it requires limited power to run. Next slide. So this project, and this is one of the ones that Paco asked me to focus on, is a partnership that we had with our local sewer authority to do work on post-demolition sites. So this was probably our largest project in the green infrastructure arena so far, and we worked with the sewer authority who really wanted to look at different ways to do stormwater treatment on post-demolition sites, and it came out of several years of work and partnership that we had with the sewer authority to learn best practices from around the country and develop the program, which also included changing the city's demolition specs to make sites more permeable. And I think it's also important to note that besides wanting to do this work, they really made a commitment to do it in a way that had job creation benefits for City of Buffalo residents. So they were willing to be creative to create a multi-part procurement process that had significant local hiring and WBE requirements. And then the work on these vacant lots became part of their long-term control plan with the EPA. So in this project with the new demolition specs, instead of leaving a lot with a high clay content, so that it really ends up being might as well be an asphalt parking lot and doesn't really absorb much stormwater. Now the demo contractors under these specs leave the site 4 inches below grade, and then our crew came in to scarify the land. So you see that in the upper left. We're scarifying the site that the demo contractor left. Then we come in and put in a bioretention soil mix. So you see that on the upper right and the bottom slide, and then we seeded it with hydro seeded it with a low maintenance grass seed mix. So for us, it was doing the work, working with the BSA on a study to see how the work performed over the 3 years of the project, and then to create good jobs for the city. And through the project, we treated 19 acres on 221 sites across the city. We also created 53 prevailing wage jobs over the 3 years. 64% of those jobs went to City of Buffalo residents, 53% were people of color, and 36% were women. We also had close to 30% participation by minority and women-owned business enterprises. And part of the reason that number is only 30%, so every sub we used was either a women-owned business or a minority and women-owned business. The rest of the work we self-performed, and as a nonprofit, we couldn't get that status. So, we continue our work with the BSA around education and outreach for their green infrastructure work, and we're definitely hoping to do more installations and maintenance for them in the future. Next slide. So I think this starts to kind of move to the impact of these investments on communities like the West Side. So in this slide, on the left, our crew is taking a break from installing a new pocket park underneath the bridge that connects Buffalo to Canada. And then on the right, they are down on the Buffalo River at an old grain silo complex called Silo City, doing some plantings and habitat work. And so, we're creating jobs, we're beautifying our community and making it more sustainable. And for our community, we are right on the river. And so, people are experiencing the impact of CSOs from their kids, getting sick from swimming in the river or eating fish, or just experiencing the smells after a CSO event. And so for all of those reasons, and for the jobs piece, these investments are significant. Next slide. And then I'll just, in conclusion, I think the other piece of this, then the last part of our model, is that we also, besides the kind of doing the work, the market transformation, the market work to create more outlets for this work to be done, we also do education and outreach to others who want to do this work in our communities. So these are people who were at a conference who may be similar to, and who are touring our green development zone and seeing one of our rain gardens. We also do, have tours of school groups, community groups, folks from the city, and everyone to learn from each other how to better do this work. So a live action version of webinars like this. So I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you. Great examples. And then we head to Atlanta. Todd?
Hey. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. Okay. Atlanta's Department of Watershed Management is mainly a water and sewer utility. We don't have a storm water utility at all. And so all our funds are mainly for water and sewer, but we do use a portion for green infrastructure, but it's a small portion, or it's in response to our consent decree that we have from 1998 that we're still working to complete in 2027. So really and truly, one of our biggest things that we implemented for green infrastructure and for community involvement was our green infrastructure task force, which was created in 2013. And this is a combination of city agencies and departments and local community partners that are either nonprofits or community groups. And so we have 11 community partners and 8 city agencies and departments involved in this. And so what we did with this whole green infrastructure task force was we ended up starting the meeting, starting to talk about how we could move forward with everything. And so we implemented a green infrastructure strategic action plan, which with this action plan, we created it in 2015 and 2016, and we applied it to the Department of Watershed Management and encouraged our partners to start looking at it and pushing to implement it. And then we had the City Council finally formally adopt it in 2017 to where it's a requirement for all city agencies and departments. And so that helps with our partners, because our community partners made this possible by coming before City Council, pushing it very hard, going to the different agencies and letting them know as taxpayers and customers of the city what they were expecting the city to do. So this has allowed us to move forward with multiple partners on different projects. And so next slide, Paco. And so one of these partnerships that we have that was developed through the Urban Waters Federal Partnership was that we have one watershed that's 19 square miles that is totally within the city limits of Atlanta. All our other watersheds cross multiple municipalities and jurisdictions. And this is in an environmental justice area where there are very low income people. The creek has been neglected. It's very polluted. And so this whole watershed creates problems, health problems. So it became one of the 19 watersheds as part of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. And this allows us to work with our federal partners and their activities, gaining leverage to create larger scale projects as well as our city partners. And so with that, we've done multiple projects. We've just finished a feasibility study with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the entire creek system, which has allowed us to go forward with funding for environmental and ecological projects within the watershed to promote aquatic life. And so that has helped us. We've had an health impact assessment of the Proctor Creek watershed, which is in progress. We have one project that they used as a test subject. It's been very helpful on gaining leverage and getting our other partner agencies to provide funding that we can't provide. We can only provide funding for water and sewer and stormwater projects and not for any other projects that are associated with that. So it's made it possible for us to have larger scale projects such as Boone Park West, Proctor Creek Greenway, and this whole list of projects on the right side of the slide here, which are all very large projects that have gotten a lot of attention and creates the momentum to move forward on these. Next slide, please. And so with this, here's one of the projects that has gotten a lot of attention. This is a capacity relief facility that we're currently under construction. This is a rendering of what it's going to look like. This is similar to our 4th Ward Park Pond that we put in 2010, which was in a very depressed area that spurred over $500 million of redevelopment in the area and improvements to the community. And so this is an area that in 2002 flooded from combined sewer flooding and sanitary sewer bills because this is in our combined sewer area. And so what has happened is we've taken this 16 acres and we're taking a portion of it for a 10 million gallon capacity relief pond, but also making it an amenity. We're working in partnership with our Department of Parks and Recreation, the Trust for Public Land, the National Monuments Foundation, to create an atmosphere that also recognizes our civil rights partners, provides a green space for a very depressed community. This community has an 80% vacancy rate of boarded up houses and high crime, and the majority of people are below poverty level. So this is an area that we're hoping to provide improvements and provide a green space to children that can't move forward. And then this is, adjacent to this is the Boone Boulevard Green Street. This is part of a EPA 319 grant that we received for water quality. We took that with our partners, other partner agencies, to raise additional funding to do streetscapes. This is under construction also. And so this is a 1.5 miles of streetscape, bike lanes, and green infrastructure that will provide some capacity relief and water quality. Next slide. And so this shows our community participants throughout. We work closely with them to make our projects work, make them an amenity to communities, make sure that the communities have input on what we're doing in their community. The last thing we want to see is to go forward with a project And when we go to break ground, you have the whole community in an uproar over we did not talk with them and make them aware of what we were doing or include them. And I believe that concludes mine, Paco.
That is correct. Thank you so much, Todd. Now we have Ms. Heck.
Hi. This is Constance Hawk from the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and I'm here with Matt Sharver, and we're going to kind of tag team this. I'll talk a little bit about our organization, and Matt will talk about some of our community partnerships. So this is where we are. We're in the northeast part of the state of Ohio. Next slide. Just a little bit about us. We are a political subdivision of the state of Ohio. We were created by court order in 1972. We serve the city of Cleveland and 61 member communities and about 1 million residents. Next slide, please. We have 3 treatment plants which treat about 90 billion gallons of sewage a year. We also operate a state certified laboratory, and you can see the number of miles in our sewer system and in our stormwater management program. And we have a capital improvement budget of this year about $292 million. Next slide. We operate in addition to the conveyance and treatment of wastewater, we operate 2 very large wet weather programs. One is the Regional Stormwater Management Program. It generates $41 million a year, and it's basically focused on flooding and erosion and water quality issues in our community. It's based, we charge our customers based on hard surfaces on their properties. The second is our Combined Sewer Overflow Mitigation Program. It's called Project Clean Lake, and it is a $3 billion program over 25 years, and those fees are generated from sewer fees. In addition to the building of a lot of gray infrastructure through the Combined Sewer Overflow Mitigation Program, we also have a significant green infrastructure component, and it has allowed us to develop some very significant partnerships, and Matt is going to talk to you about those now.
Thanks, Constance. Paco, next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through and discuss the variety of ways that the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District supports our partners and our local water decision makers in their efforts to improve and protect water quality. So as Constance mentioned, our Project Clean Lake, that's our Combined Sewer Overflow Program. Born out of this program was an important component, our External Advisory Committee to our Green Infrastructure Appendix 3 program, which is under our Project Clean Lake program, was created that advised not only on the combined sewer overflow green infrastructure implementation, but then also played a critical role in the development of our green infrastructure policy that was developed, which affects our implementation of Project Clean Lake, our Green Infrastructure Grants Program, our Member Community Infrastructure Program, and other programs as we try to implement green infrastructure across the district in our programming. In terms of our Green Infrastructure Grants Program, that's a program that the grant reimbursement program that we've provided $4.7 million since 2014 to local partners in the combined sewer area, which they've been able to achieve a $19.6 million stormwater runoff reduction in the combined area. So it's a significant partnership for us. Next slide, please. The next stakeholder group that I'll touch on is our Member Community Infrastructure Program. So the sewer district has a suburban council of governments, and that council formulated a sub-grant committee where we developed a Member Community Infrastructure Grants Program that provides sewer rehabilitation programming for our service area. And in the first 2 years of programming, $5 million each year was provided to our member communities. So those are municipalities in our service area, cities, villages, and townships. And in our third year of funding, this year, we'll be providing up to $7 million for those programs. Next slide. Another stakeholder group is our Watershed Advisory Committee groups, which are underneath our Regional Stormwater Management Program. So we have 5 main watersheds in our service area, our 355 square mile service area. And so this particular Watershed Advisory Committee groups are made up of municipal officials, our member communities, and any public agency that has infrastructure maintenance obligations in our service area. And then watershed groups and nonprofit groups are also invited to the table as non-members, and these meetings are also open to the public. But these, the watershed advisory committees are, again, instrumental to the sewer district in providing advisement on our watershed activities and prioritization of stormwater construction projects. Next slide, please. The last group that we're going to highlight today is our watershed partner service agreements. So these are grants, reimbursement grants that we provide to nonprofit 501c3 watershed organizations in our service area. They help to further the district's mission and provide technical services to the district on our stormwater management programming. And we have 9 watershed nonprofit organizations that we currently fund. We've been funding these groups since 2009. We fund them annually, currently at about $40,000 a year. And then since 2009, we've provided $1.8 million worth of funding to these watershed groups to help deliver services and network our programming further than the district's capacity. Next slide, please. And lastly, we will just highlight one of those specific groups. West Creek Conservancy has been provided funding since 2009. And there's listed on the screen are just the variety of things that they provide in terms of service deliverables to the sewer district. But they've been able to leverage over $53 million worth of conservation efforts in West Creek and beyond in terms of watershed management over the past 20 years. So our contribution annually of operating funds to these nonprofit groups, again, leverages additional dollars into our service area to improve and protect water quality.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt and Ms. Hack. We did get a few comments there that the screen is a little bit cut off. We apologize for that. We were trying to make the aspect ratio of the screen wide for some computer capabilities, but the video will show clearly all the slides. I apologize. Again, now we're going to Wisconsin with Ezra.
Hi, Paco. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This is Ezra with St. Wisconsin, based in Madison, where Wisconsin State Capitol is located, but with some programmatic work all around the state.
There's a little bit of echo on your side.
Hey, I don't know what to do about that. I'll turn my volume down in case that helps.
Okay.
Better?
No. Well, we'll just have to do. Are you calling in?
I am.
Okay. Do you have the speakers on your computer off?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to deal with that. Keep going.
Is this better? Not better. I hear the echo myself. The only thing I can think of, Paco, if it's bad, is we could have someone else go next, and I could call in from another line.
Okay.
What do you think?
Sure. I will jump your slides and I will go to Howard, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you. My apologies.
Okay, Howard. We can't hear you right now, Howard.
Hi, can you
There.
hear me, Paco?
Yep.
Okay, great, very good. Welcome, everybody. My name is Howard Newkrug. I'm at the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and talking to you about strategies for public engagement, things I've learned. I've spent 40 years at the Philadelphia Water Department, retired about 2 years ago, and they didn't teach me in my civil engineering classes about stakeholder involvement and what to do. So my perspective might be a little bit different from some of the others that you've heard speak already, because I'm gonna show you some of the things that I've done wrong over the time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Paco, I think you put up the wrong slide pack for me, but go ahead. Next slide. Okay. I've been working with the leading utilities of the World Network, which is a group of folks that are the most innovative public water utilities in the world, and we're looking at what kind of innovations have been done and where can we all work together. And I'm showing this because on the bottom left-hand corner is something called stakeholder engagement. And it's interesting that more of the best utilities in the world are still involved with trying to figure out how to innovate in stakeholder engagement than in any other aspect of our utilities, and that includes water resources development and treatment and IT and many others. Next slide. And this is a picture. This is a picture from Rotterdam, and it's showing a stormwater basin that is also a public park and basketball court. And when it rains in Rotterdam, this basin will fill up with water. And it shows the advancement of things that are happening in Europe that's even beyond some of the things that you're seeing here in the States, with the ability of being able to use one site and use it for more than one purpose. And I think that the important thing here is to recognize that water utilities have been underground. We've had facilities, we've had pipes, but basically we've been closed to the public. And in the last 20, 30 years, we're now moving above ground. And the most obvious connection here is green infrastructure, and now we connect with that. But it goes even further than that, as you've seen from some of the other slides, to things like environmental justice and support for local community. Next slide, please. And what we're trying to do as a water industry is really connect what our 5 big things that we do are access to water, safe drinking water, preventing pollution and cleaning up our rivers, flooding and drought, and wondering how do we connect that with the things that are really of concern to local communities, education, poverty, and you can read down this list. And each community might have a slightly different version of what those priorities are, but they're very different from the water utility. And the water utilities end, we're spending a lot of money. We have, water utilities typically have the largest capital budgets of any entity in city government. And because of that, what the water industry is seeing now is that we have a lot of responsibility towards maintaining and making sure that our cities become both resilient and sustainable into the future. Next slide, please. And what we see is water as a transformational tool that brings our communities towards a just and sustainable future. And what you're looking at is a picture of kids from Cramp Elementary School in Philadelphia on their new playground that was built with monies that came from the school district, the water utility, and from Trust for Public Lands and some other funders. And recognizing that you need to work in community to build community. Obviously, the water department's piece here is that we're collecting the water and holding it underground underneath this play surface in order to provide less overflows into our systems. Next slide, please. And this is in a sadder part of town. You can see in the background a mural called Stop the Violence, and yes, those are names of people, mostly teenagers, who were killed in this community. And it's been very sad. And this is the recreation center, the basketball courts that are available for this community. Next slide, please. But things have changed, and we did things good here because we worked with the Philadelphia Eagles, in particular a man named Connor Barwin, who plays for the Philadelphia Eagles, who supported this project with our mayor, Mayor Nutter, and community, and worked with them to understand what needs to be done different. And you can't see in the bottom right front, but it's the start of our rain garden, which is taking all the water from this site and bringing it into a rain garden, and new basketball courts. And the sign, the new mural on the back is "Life tried to bury us, but we are the root and the seed." Next slide, please. Philadelphia has over 40,000 vacant lots. A lot of them look like these two that I'm showing here. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. The first one, I'll stay on this slide and talk about the vision contest we had in Philadelphia, wondering what can you do with an industrial vacant site, commercial vacant site, and a residential vacant site. And we came together, all the planners and development folks in Philadelphia, and we came and we stood around the plans of the city of Philadelphia. We had a big map that showed where all the vacant lots are. And as we walked through it to find 3 real sites to do imaginary visions of green infrastructure on and redevelopment on, every site, somebody in the room had a story on and a reason why you couldn't develop there. And it starts to show why in cities like Philadelphia and Buffalo and many of the others that are on this webinar are having trouble being able to do green infrastructure. 40,000 vacant lots in Philadelphia. Next slide, please. So what I didn't learn in civil engineering school was that sometimes helping community takes many different forms, and sometimes you're not always doing things the way that the community would want you to do. We had this site, and it's partially cut off the bottom here in the bottom right, but basically it was a vacant lot, and across the street was a recreation center, and we built a gazebo. We put this beautiful mural that you're seeing in the main part of this picture, and a rain garden, and rebuilt this vacant lot, and also did work to improve the sidewalks and rain gardens and other things on the playground that's on your bottom right towards the left hand side. And we got funding for this. We got about $500,000 for the site, and we got it from EPA and from local foundations and the water department, and we were doing everything right. We found the block captain and worked with her and the people she brought together and to develop this site. And then we had our ribbon cutting, and I stood there at that gazebo, and the community came out extremely angry. They were angry because why did we do this? Why did we spend $500,000 on this site to put in rain gardens and a gazebo and a mural when there were so many problems, so many different priorities going on in this neighborhood, and so many needs with education and with jobs and with crime and with drugs? And their question was, who prioritized this? You had $500,000 to put into the corner of Hunter and 55th Streets, and this is how you spent it. Next slide. And this is another vacant lot. It seems like, wouldn't it be great if Philadelphia Water came in and took this site and put some benches in there and greened it up and used it for stormwater management and gave back to the community. And we did just that. And that's when I found out that there was a lot of anger that came back at me and back at the utility from the councilwoman who oversees this area. And what she was saying to us, which we didn't fully grasp at the time, was that this is a drug corner. This is where people do drugs. And what are we going to do? We're giving them a nice little area with some benches and giving them an opportunity to continue to use it as an area. Next slide, please. So I was in Detroit recently for a conference, and I heard somebody from the audience use this quote, and I'm borrowing it here. It's doing for is very different than doing with, and the lesson for water utility managers throughout the country and many different city government and government folks, which is not fully appreciated everywhere at this point, but it's something that needs to be considered whenever you do anything, is that when you're doing that, that you really need to be working with community and not doing what you think is right for the community. And Claire Lava from Urban Roots, and she worked on the Ralph Brooks Park that I showed before. She said, none of us have any interest in coming in and telling the community what they want. We just want to help facilitate the community's needs and voice in their voice in order to figure out how their public space can be utilized. And what this is getting at is the issues of gentrification, property values, whose vision for the community are you really expressing, who's getting the jobs to do this, and who's setting the priorities. So you start looking at all these things and working with stakeholder groups, and lessons learned that we need to do from the utility side and also from the outreach community is to work together to better understand how to bring something about that serves community. Next slide, please. So there's hundreds of projects, years in the making. We do planning and design and construction and post-construction work. And for each of these, there's community meetings that are needed. And in all told, there are tens of thousands of community meetings that need to be had. And the unfortunate part is while a utility like Philadelphia spends $300 million a year on a capital program, that's $3 billion over a decade, which is significantly more than the city government has to spend on its capital programs. We're doing this over time. It's a decade worth of work to go from coming up with an idea and what you want to do, moving forward and doing and building it. And during that time, your stakeholders change, and the values and the desires of the community also change. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a project that came up for doing green infrastructure in a community along a street and understanding what the community wants. And I'm showing this only for the value of understanding that if you are a stakeholder and you want to get involved, the time to get involved is now, is time, is before the utility gets out there and meets with the community. The community needs to get together and figure out what they want. Next slide. And Paco, you can go through a few of these slides rather quick. These are just other examples of stormwater demonstration projects. And the question is that each of these slides that you see here is how is stakeholder involvement really had, and did we spend the money in the right way? In this project, I'd say yes. Next slide, please. And water fountains. So we started planting water fountains around Philadelphia, and what a great give back to the community. And it's of such little consequence and cost, and community groups looking to improve their neighborhoods, here's a nice, easy way to do it, to get your water utility to do something like this. Next slide. And here's just some pictures. They got a little shuffled here, but looking at the two lower pictures is a before and after of someone's backyard. And you know, it's just Philadelphia. These, you know, a lot of middle class families there. So not sure where you live and how you look at this and wonder, is this as best you can do? But this is such an improvement for folks in Philadelphia, and really a touch upon green infrastructure and how to work with community and how to help them help themselves. And in the center is a program we call Rain Check that is similar to the program that you saw Jennifer talk about from Push Buffalo. Next slide. And just very quickly, I mean, there's so many different dimensions to working with community, and I just wanted to pull out of Philadelphia a little bit and show a broader map of watersheds and the connection that we have with every watershed, and making sure there's a Friends of group, and making sure that we all recognize that we're all doing this water stuff because of the rivers and streams and creeks. And particularly when you look at something like the Tacony-Frankford Watershed Partnership, it did not exist in the year 2000. The Water Department created it. We brought people together, started to have meetings, funded the cookies and ice cream, and by 2005, it became an independent organization with its own funding, and it has become the eyes and the ears of the community. And with that, it allows the water utility to do what it does so well, which is deliver fresh, clean water, and have the community out there as taking a leadership role in green infrastructure and maintaining our rivers and streams. Next slide.
So that is my slide of our community of practice, but I'll go back and try and see if Ezra can call in. The last one you had was on the library.
Okay, you're going back. Well, I guess I'll end there. Thanks very much, Paco, for the time here.
Thank you, Howard, very much. Ezra, are you there?
I am here. How do I sound?
Better, much better.
Howard, thank you for the flexibility on the scheduling of our two talks here. Clean Wisconsin, just to understand sort of where and how we fit in, is a state-level environmental advocacy organization, and we do work both at the state level, which has been our bread and butter for over 40 years, but we've increasingly, in my 10 years or so here, gotten more and more involved, especially in our water program work, more closer to on the ground in project work, working with partners at the local scale on policy and implementation of efforts, including green infrastructure and a whole host of other kinds of water efforts. And today I wanted to talk about ways in which we've partnered over time. You can go to the next slide, please, Paco. The ways in which we've partnered with both water and sewer utilities. I mean, drinking water utilities and sewer utilities. In Wisconsin, they tend not to be housed under the same roof, except for a few limited examples. But we've worked with both of those kinds of utilities. On the water side, we've I'll give you a few examples and cite some of the takeaways there, and then I'll flip to the sort of work we've done with the sewer utilities that parallels some of the other speakers we've heard from today. But on the water utility side, we've worked with water utilities in Wisconsin on water conservation and efficiency efforts. Usually to that end of water conservation, we've worked on water rate structures, a little bit of an equity angle as well when we work on the water rate structures, but we're not, principally a ratepayer advocacy organization. We have some organizations in Wisconsin that do that kind of work. But and then the third thing we've worked on is state policy this last legislative session to increase funding across the state for the utilities that have lead pipes and lead pipe replacement needs and that sort of thing. So we've been involved in these engagements with water utilities. We've been involved in different modes or different ways. We've been a stakeholder in processes water utilities put on to engage the public and interested folks. We've been involved as a partner, and we've been involved as an intervener. There's a legal definition of that term here in Wisconsin, where when different kinds of regulated utilities come forward for their rate cases to be approved to increase rates or change rate structures or that sort of thing, there is room for parties that are interested to intervene in those processes. I'll talk a little bit about one example where intervener in the water rate in the water utility world anyway sure felt, I think, to those involved on the other side of the table from us like an adversarial thing. So I'll talk about that one as I note on the slide. We've had some engagements with water utilities that have been good. We've had some that have been okay, and we've had maybe one anyway that I'll cite as an example that got a little bit ugly. First example, one where we engaged with the water utility and things really went well. Pretty recently, just about 3 years ago, we engaged with the city of Madison on its water utility board had decided to evaluate their rate structures across the board, across the different kinds of water use categories. And they were after water conservation and also looking at sort of equity questions across their ratepayers. And they actually invited us to participate. We had been involved in an earlier case in a relatively limited way, but they knew who we were and that we had an interest in this kind of work. And so they invited us to participate, come in and present in front of the board sort of early in their process. And so we took that opportunity and made some recommendations. We asked that they have their consultant. They hired an outside private consultant to evaluate rate structures, and we encouraged them to make sure and look across all of their water use categories at the possibility of shifting from declining block rate structures. I won't go into all this detail, but to shifting to inclining block rate structures that would much better encourage conservation and discourage sort of wasteful use. The initial inclination of that consultant was not to necessarily consider inclining block rates for any of the categories except for the residential category, which is pretty typical across at least the Midwest. It's always historically been the first place people look to in inclining block rates. Well, at the end of the day, after some back and forth and engagement with their consultant, a really great outcome happened where the city ended up and the Public Service Commission here in Wisconsin ended up approving new rate structures that shifted from declining block rates to inclining block rates across the board, across the residential, the commercial, and the industrial water use categories in Madison here. And so a real win-win there. It started out well, a partnership, if you will, and good working, engagement together, and then an outcome that everybody was really happy with. So that's one way that it can go, and did go in our experience. Another example where things went okay, but different than certainly our hopes and expectations going into it, is as follows. So around 2010, a number of years ago, we earlier in our work with water utilities, we reached out to Milwaukee's Waterworks. Milwaukee's a Great Lakes city, as folks know. They were looking into their rates, and I think there was a bit of a rate increase was their main reason for coming into the Public Service Commission. But because they're such a big user, they're in the Great Lakes Basin, we thought we'd jump in and engage in that process, and that we'd advocate for rates that would encourage water conservation and efficiency. As we started to get to know the Waterworks director and talk with her, she referred to water conservation as the dreaded C word. She didn't want to talk about water conservation. It wasn't something she was at all interested in. A bit of background that maybe explains, at least in part, where she was coming from, is this is I think a pretty classic case of big cities like Buffalo, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Detroit, and others. The water utility is at about 30% of the capacity that it's got infrastructure to be able to provide from a heyday of manufacturing, a larger population, post World War II. And to think in terms of conservation for that person heading the waterworks, that feels like reduced revenues, which feels like I can't pay the bills, I can't keep up my infrastructure, I'm in trouble with the mayor, et cetera, et cetera. She just did not want to talk about water conservation and efficiency What we found, though, we kept talking and working through these conversations, was leaks and finding leaks and helping customers out there find leaks was something she was interested. We thought, well, that's still conserving water, and we can find some common ground there. So let's work together on that. And we did some information and education and outreach materials and that sort of thing, a bit of a program to help reach out to the customer base in the city and help them address leaks and know how to address leaks, which in addition to saving water, of course, can also help reduce bills. If someone especially has a leak in their home or in their business that they don't find for a while, they can have a pretty scary bill show up the next time that the bills come in the mail. So we found a win-win there, even though what we expected maybe going into it wasn't really going to be in the cards. We quickly learned, but through keeping the communication open, that sort of thing, we got to an outcome that worked for everybody involved. And then my third water utility example, again, a number of years ago, I think it was even a couple of years prior to the Milwaukee example I cited. I'll leave the name of the community out of this one just to protect the innocent or not. But we plugged in again on a Public Service Commission rate case, and we at that time, this was our first with a water utility. We had worked over our 40 years or so of history leading up to that with the electricity utilities in Wisconsin extensively, and at the Public Service Commission, where Wisconsin has these provisions. I talked about the word intervener earlier. And NGOs like ourselves and other kinds of advocacy organizations are allowed under state law to plug in on rate cases in the electricity and water worlds and plug in as an intervener. That's sort of an official status where you enter into the case and participate alongside the utility that's asking to change its rates, the Public Service Commission staff, experts, and anyone else who might intervene in the case. There's also a provision that allows for intervener compensation. And this had never been an issue in the world of electricity utilities, which of course are large, for-profit, utilities, regulated, of course, but a different kind of animal than a municipal utility. We of course would agree and grant that. But in that world, we had asked for intervener compensation when we were going to bring expertise into the case, add value to the outcome by providing our point of view and our expertise and information, that sort of thing. The utilities put money into a pot that allows for compensation for those folks who intervene. Well, maybe naively, we thought we would do the same thing in this first water case for us, and plugged in not only to be an intervener, but also asking for a relatively small amount of money, about $30,000, in intervener compensation to compensate us for the staff time and attorney time and staff time and that sort of thing. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. The fact that we were asking for money, I think, above all, but even just the intervention felt, I think, to the utility like an adversarial move, like an opposition to what they were trying to do, which we really was not our intent. And as we fought this out sort of in the press and behind the scenes, at some point we got a little bit more clarity on the part of everybody involved that it wasn't an oppositional thing. We were there to try to seek what we had an interest in: water conservation and efficiency, rates that made sense as far as encouraging those things, and at the same time that the utilities sought to increase rates and do some other things. We thought there might be some room, some common ground, some room in the middle there. Well, zooming through some of the machinations that played out over a number of months, what happened in the end there is we did retract our request for compensation, which I think helped to neutralize things a little bit. But we stayed involved in the case. We continued to advocate for rate structures and for some other conservation activities. And we ended up negotiating a settlement that came out of that case that everyone was able to live with. The Public Service Commission was able to endorse in the end and make it a part of the rate case proceedings. And we made some incremental improvements at the time in the conservation and efficiency programming of the community. And then we teed up for their next rate case to come at that time, or likely in the next 2 to 3 years following this case, that there would be both a move towards some more regular billing so that people get better price signals as they get those bills regularly and can see some indication of how much water they're using, and whether they're being as conservative as they might be and that sort of thing. And then also the settlement teed up an in-depth look at rate structures and evaluation of the possibility of changing to some rate structures that would encourage conservation and discourage waste to be revisited the next time that the city came forward to the Public Service Commission for a look at its rates. So an outcome that we could all live with in the end, but interesting twists and turns and rough stuff along the way in that case. So the takeaways that I thought about as I was preparing the presentation from those, still on that water utility slide, Paco. Communication is key. I hinted at that as I sort of told those stories, but early and often, and making clear what your interests are, so that that's clear to everyone involved, and there aren't sort of misperceptions folks are running with on what you might be after with your engagement, or your involvement in the process. That's really important. We certainly learned through these efforts that the credibility and trust are really important. One, but two, those are something that's earned, and that's a two-way street that cuts both ways. And all the parties involved are working to, if they so choose anyway, to gain the trust and to be viewed as a credible player by those involved on the other side of the table. And we've certainly learned through these engagements too, the common ground is the best place to start. And we had to find out sometimes through the process what that common ground looks like. It's not necessarily clear at the outset what it's going to be or where you might find something you can agree on. But you work through the process, again, stay open in communications and that sort of thing, and see what comes out as the kind of common ground or even win-win stuff that can possibly be in the cards given the dynamic that you find yourself in. It's always different, but we've again learned a lot from these different kinds of engagements we've had here in Wisconsin with water utilities. I'll shift then, next slide please, Paco, to some of the work we've done with sewer utilities, and a lot of it parallels what we've heard about from other speakers, some work on green infrastructure, education and outreach, installing green infrastructure in neighborhoods, much along the lines of what Push Buffalo and the folks in Philadelphia are doing, and others I know throughout parts of Ohio and other places, Detroit as well. We've worked on a local policy level significantly in the Milwaukee metropolitan area on encouraging more green infrastructure and removing barriers from sort of old and outdated local policies, codes, and ordinances that usually inadvertently, not for any intentional reason, but oftentimes you can find ghosts and gremlins in the zoning code and the landscaping ordinance and the stormwater ordinance, perhaps, these kinds of things that block green infrastructure implementation by the private sector and the public sector. And so we've worked significantly on that effort with a number of partners. And then we've also done work on state policy that connects in with the stormwater and this kind of work, but advancing policies that innovate on how we address both non-point source pollution and point source water pollution at the watershed scale, and connecting the non-point and the point source folks in watersheds in more of a partnership to try to deal with this problem holistically rather than sort of in silos. Here we've been involved in different ways. Just as I said with the water utility side of things, we've been involved as a partner, we've been involved as a technical assistance provider of sorts, and like some of the other examples we heard today, we've been involved as a fundee, as a recipient of funds, or a contractor to the sewer utility in Milwaukee in any case, and I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically in just a minute. So the partnership example I would cite here, we worked with several of Wisconsin's largest municipal sewer utilities in a small group that spun out of our State Department of Natural Resources had a technical advisory committee with a whole sort of diverse host of stakeholders around the table to help shape new rules. In our case, we were creating numeric water quality standards for phosphorus in Wisconsin. And this group of municipal sewer utilities and a few nonprofit partners spun off from that group when it was a bit sort of deadlocked and not moving forward. And we ended up together conceiving of a really innovative new approach. I kind of hinted this a moment ago, that's now enshrined in state law that the US EPA has endorsed, where we take a watershed scale adaptive management approach to phosphorus reduction, bringing together the point and non-point source sides of the equation, and kind of builds on water quality trading concepts, but actually goes a number of steps farther than even water quality trading, as I've seen it. Frameworks for trading that have materialized in other parts of the country. So a pretty neat, novel approach that came out of this close working relationship, a trusting relationship, a good open communication-based relationship between sewer utilities and nonprofit water quality advocates. So this approach now, about 7 or 8 years later, has been used in several watersheds around Wisconsin with great success. And I know that lots of us from Wisconsin have talked about it in various venues all around the Great Lakes and around the country, just because there's a lot of interest in this sort of innovative new approach to breaking through some of the barriers we find in the Clean Water Act to really getting the job done on water quality at the watershed level, given how the Clean Water Act emphasizes so much, the regulation of the point source side, but fewer tools on the non-point side. So a pretty neat outcome there, working in partnership with folks at the sewer utilities. As far as involvement on our behalf as a technical assistance provider, essentially, so we and some other nonprofit partners, in this case with another large municipal utility, we worked together under a grant we secured together and helped this utility assess the potential for water quality trading or other kinds of approaches like that in the watershed that they're in, which has a significant amounts of both point and non-point source pollution, certainly a lot of agricultural on the non-point source side, a lot of stormwater. It's a relatively well developed watershed, and it's a watershed with significant impairments, and is actually one of the top 3 contributors of significant water quality problems to the Great Lakes. And so, working together with those partners, including the sewer utility, we helped them to assess their options and come up with a good basis for evaluating the specific ways that they'll choose to address at least the pollution that they're on the hook to reduce through their next permits with the Department of Natural Resources and the EPA and that sort of thing. And so a nice sort of technical assistance and partnership approach that worked out quite well for everyone involved in that case.
Ezra, we're going to call it
okay.
Time now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can do that. Yeah, thanks, Paco. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, great. As you all have heard, plenty of opportunities for interaction with your utility groups. Some great examples, some adversarial, but some lesson learned from all of our speakers. We appreciate your time from all the speakers and from all the participants. We're barely scratching the surface, so that's why we created this platform of engagement on the conference. You'll receive an invite where we can exchange more ideas, more best practices, more questions. We do have a question from the audience for the Northeast Ohio folks, which I will post on this online platform, which is called the conference, and our group, our civic engagement. I'll post it there, and we'll hopefully get some feedback. We appreciate folks that joined us. If you are not a member of River Network, these and other services are available to you. We have a new map feature. Please join us. Consider that, or check our new map to see if your organization is listed there. And again, our last webinar will be next month. Please sign up for it, and we appreciate your time and all of our speakers. Thank you very, very much. As soon as I close this webinar, we will probably get an evaluation in your email, and we definitely will appreciate the feedback. Thank you again.